Germany did not become a dictatorship because an entire country suddenly lost its mind. It happened because a frightened, divided, and exhausted society was convinced that democracy was no longer capable of saving it. And that may be one of the most important warnings history ever gave us. To be clear, I'm going to be speaking about Germany in the aftermath of World War I, before Hitler took power and before World War II began. After Germany lost World War I in 1918, the monarchy collapsed and a new democracy was created, known as the Weimar Republic. Probably said that wrong, sorry. But it was a democracy born into catastrophe. Germany had lost a devastating war. Millions were dead or wounded, families were grieving, and returning soldiers were traumatized. The country was dealing with food shortages, political violence, and the collapse of the social order people had known. And as World War I was ending, the influenza pandemic of 1918 was sweeping across the world. So imagine what German society had just lived through: a world war, mass death, a pandemic, food shortages, political revolution, and the sudden disappearance of the government and institutions people had known their entire lives. Then came the Treaty of Versailles. Many Germans saw it as humiliating and deeply unfair. Germany was forced to accept responsibility for the war, give up territory, sharply reduce its military, and pay enormous reparations. To many ordinary Germans, it felt less like a peace agreement and more like a punishment imposed by the countries that had defeated them. That anger became politically powerful. Extremists used it to argue that Germany had been humiliated by foreign powers and betrayed from within by politicians, socialists, and Jewish people. In 1923, hyperinflation wiped out people's savings. Then, just as Germany began recovering, the Great Depression hit. Businesses collapsed. Millions became unemployed. People who had lived ordinary, stable lives suddenly felt as though the entire system had abandoned them. And when people are frightened, economically desperate, and no longer trust their institutions, they become far more vulnerable to someone offering simple answers. The Nazis told Germans that their problems were not complicated. They told them Germany had been betrayed. They told them the government was weak. They told them the press was lying. They told them political opponents were destroying the country. And they gave the public groups to blame, especially Jewish people, communists, and anyone they could portray as disloyal or un-German. They did not sell authoritarianism as oppression. They sold it as national restoration. They sold censorship as protection, political violence as self-defense, and obedience as patriotism, and loyalty to one leader as loyalty to the country. But here's the part people often miss. Hitler did not win the overwhelming support of every German and simply take over the country. The Nazi Party became the largest party, but it never won a majority in a free national election. Hitler was appointed chancellor by conservative political elites who believed they could use his popularity, control him, and protect their own power. They were catastrophically wrong. Once he was inside the government, a national emergency was used to suspend civil liberties. Political opponents were arrested. Independent journalism was crushed. Other political parties were eliminated, and the institutions meant to restrain power either cooperated, surrendered, or were dismantled. Germany's history is not proof that every pandemic, economic crisis, or divided society will become a dictatorship. And Canada and the United States are not 1920s Germany. But some of the conditions that make democracy vulnerable exist in both countries right now. The lesson from Germany is not that history will inevitably repeat itself. The lesson is that democratic societies are not automatically protected from authoritarianism simply because they believe it could never happen there. The question is not whether Canada or the United States is exactly like Germany in the 1920s or 30s. The question is whether we are willing to recognize the conditions that made authoritarianism possible and address them before someone uses those conditions to take democracy apart. The collective trauma and the social division left behind by a pandemic. Economic anxiety and the belief that ordinary people are being abandoned by the system. Failing trust in governments, institutions, experts, and the media. Misinformation spreading faster than facts. Political opponents being described not simply as wrong, but as enemies who are destroying the country. Minority groups being blamed for much larger economic and social problems. And people becoming so desperate for certainty that leaders offering simple answers, more power, and someone to punish begin to sound appealing. That does not mean the ending is predetermined. It means we need to be cognizant of the conditions and recognize how easily they can be exploited. Because history does not need to repeat itself perfectly to warn us. Economic fear can be weaponized. Collective trauma can be turned into resentment. Propaganda can make neighbors fear one another. And democracy can be dismantled legally by people who never intended to respect it.